was one of the basketball players for the faculty team, and intramurals, yes, in 1968, and that Dr. Mantai was, he started a really interesting program to have students go through the chemistry labs at their own pace. So I'm sure that that was very much appreciated. And they have so many awards between them, but I'm not going to talk about that. I'm just going to pass on the microphone because I know you need to hear them.
Okay, well, thank you all for coming. We're almost, I guess we're underwhelmed a little by the turnout, but apparently the video will be made available in about a week or so, and anybody can check it out and share the wisdom that's going to come forth here. So I've given this little presentation by Ken and me a name. We can call this the Grumpy Old Men's Tour. Probably the first and last appearance we have. So we decided, Karen and I have been independently taking notes as to the kinds of subjects, topics we would talk about, and we shared them, and then Ken put them together in an organized fashion. So I suggested that we start with our first impressions of the campus the first time we came to the campus. So since I'm starting with this, I'll let Ken start, and I'll chime in when he's finished. Do you want to have this? We hold this back and forth.
Okay. Hi, everybody. It's interesting to be here. It's been 5 years since I've actually taught a class. You can't hear? What, you have to push a button? Testing, testing. Okay. I'll try to talk a little. But is this better? All right, it's been a while since I've been here, so I'm not used to the microphone or anything yet. The early impressions of campus, when Bob and I were interviewed and came here and looked around, it was mostly sagebrush and just dirt. There were just very few original buildings. The biology building, the chemistry building, the concrete was just still wet in that building, and the administration building was here. The smog was a lot worse, as you can imagine. There were no dormitories. There was a brand new parking lot out in front, and I thought it was pretty desolate.
My first visit to the campus was not for an interview. I interviewed at a professional convention in snowy Toronto in December. But I did come out over Memorial Day weekend prior to the fall of 1968 when I started teaching. And the two science buildings, the biological and physical science buildings, were not yet open then. They were still under construction, and most of it was done, but still so. And the same thing, the only other building aside from the temporary buildings, which have lasted and will outlast me certainly, was the old gym, what we call the old gym. And so that would open in the fall. And otherwise, there were the three temporary buildings, what is now Chaparral Hall, and Sierra Hall, and the administration building, and that was the campus. Most of it the ground was brown and dry. There was still some vineyards on the campus, and I remember early on being taken by then I think the dean of admissions took me and someone else around, and we went and picked some grapes from it. It was really rustic. Plus, the city of San Bernardino was much further away in the sense that it hadn't built up all these apartment complexes and new homes that are around the campus. Nothing was there. There was the couple of bars down Kendall and some rickety old houses in the area, and that was about it. And then people didn't even know about the campus. If I told people I was teaching at Cal State College, we were college then, San Bernardino, they said, okay, good. Ken took this movie, what, in 1967 or so? 69, okay. So you get a sense from the okay. At any rate, it was all getting started. So people used to think this place, they mistook it for an extension of San Bernardino Valley College. Now we've since established our own identity, but it took a lot of work. And I'm remembering, I think it was 1972 or 3. The local paper, the San Bernardino Sun, had a reporter who really wasn't friendly to the campus. And the Sunday paper led, front page, big headline about this place and what was wrong with it. it was really a nasty piece, and he emphasized everything that was negative. At the time, I held a temporary position of relations with schools officer. I stopped teaching for 6 months, and I visited all the high schools and community colleges in the two-county area, and I was trying to talk up the university, the college, and the advantages, and I felt this guy was undermining what I was trying to do. So I wrote a response, a lengthy response, which appeared the following Saturday in the back of the paper. So the newspaper had control of that. But again, it was a very different place, very small, hardly a feel for a campus at all. You could see more snakes on campus, some rattlesnakes, tarantulas, come across those. Coyotes, you can hear the coyotes if you couldn't see them. Yeah. So, but we've grown up over the decades, as a university should. And although it's a different place, there are things that we miss from those earlier days. But then there's so many other advantages. So we have a number of topics. We can talk about some of our employment. Let me start out in saying, I don't think we're doing this anymore, and I don't think we've done this for a long time. But we had to take a loyalty oath. I had to come here and I had to swear allegiance to the state of California and the United States of America to make sure that I was not a subversive, not someone who's coming here only for the purpose of overthrowing the government of the United States. And I've always thought loyalty oaths were ridiculous, because if I had such a purpose of overthrowing the government, lying about it would be the least of the problems. So somewhere along the line, they did away with those.
Still did it in 1999.
Not really, as recently as 1999. Wow. So there you go. Let's see. Ken had some. Let me pass it to Ken, because I don't want to monopolize the whole thing. But we're talking about phones. Today, telephones, smartphones, and the like are ubiquitous. Everybody walks and talks to themselves and whoever's at the other end. Of course, there were no such phones. So if I want to make a phone call, what do I have to do, Ken?
Back in those days, you'd find a phone booth. There weren't very many, but there were a few. But very few students used phones. We just didn't do that sort of thing. You didn't have to use the internet. The internet only really began with browsing in 1993 with the first Mosaic program. We had embryonic connections to other campuses here in 1973. I could sit, we didn't have laptops or anything. We had just a teletype. And I could sit at the teletype in the chemistry and physical science building, and I was connected, not to everyone in the world, but to the other campuses. I think there might have been 18 campuses at that time. So I could put sort of embryonic email onto the listserv. It was more like a listserv today. And we would talk about the basketball sports and things like that. That's the phone calls and internet back those days. People were more interested in classes and grades, I hope. We saw deer. I was in the physical science building. I keep forgetting about this. It was about 7 o'clock maybe when I would finally get to leave and go home, and deer were in the drinking out of a fountain between the two buildings. There used to be a drinking fountain there. As a matter of fact, that little clip you saw, Roz was drinking out of a fountain that was in front of the chemistry building. I think maybe there were too many complaints that on a windy day you just get a face full, and anyway, they pulled that fountain out fairly soon. When it rained, it was terrible in the early days. If you were in the biology building or the physical science, because the cement sidewalks didn't go that far, and you had to negotiate little wooden planks to get around the campus in those days through the mud.
Makes us seem like pioneers, After class, we'd go into the stagecoach and head home. But the number of things that were dramatically different that would be especially of interest to students is that class size was small. Now, class size is still pretty good on this campus relative to other public universities, and many classes are quite small. I'm teaching a senior research seminar this quarter, so I'm still teaching, and I have 2 more years after this before I have to stop. And for me, it'll round out 50 years of teaching at Cal State, which amazes me that time has gone by so fast. But I have a class right now with 7 people in it, which is wonderful for the students. Could have held 15, just didn't work out that way. Maybe I scared them off, I don't really know. But 20 students was the normal maximum size for all classes except for a few large lectures that were in PS10 over there. And that was the only large lecture there was, and that was pretty good. On the other hand, whereas today, when we hire new faculty, I'm speaking from the perspective of my department, the history department, but I expect it's similar in other departments. We give new people a reduced load. They teach fewer classes the first year. We try to get them both integrated into the university and give them a head start on their professional career so they can succeed while they're here. When that didn't happen, but once upon a time. We got no money to move, all moving expenses, and I moved from the East Coast, from New York City. I had to bear the burden of all that, not even a few dollars, but I had to do that. And then from the first year on, I taught a full load. A full load then, in the quarter system, 3 courses per quarter. It was 12 hours each year. Now that may not sound, each quarter per week, and that may not sound like a lot, but for me, only one of the courses I was teaching out of, I taught 9, 6 preps altogether. Only one of them I had taught once before. I had 5 new preps that first year, as well as trying to establish myself. I have no idea how I did that, but somehow I managed to do that. Now, I'm not upset that people today have it better. I think it's long overdue, and I'm very happy that our new faculty have that advantage. But the small class size has been a major contribution, I think, to the well-being of education that we provide here, and I'm a big supporter of that. My oldest son graduated here with a Bachelor of Arts, and he then went on, he was in the College of Business, and he went and got an MBA as well, so I'm definitely a supporter of the university from that perspective. But in addition to that, let's see, I had another thought. Let's see, I know students had to, we were given a monetary goal in terms of what students should pay for books per course. And it's going to shock you. $25 per course. Now, we couldn't always meet that, or often exceeded it, but that just gives you a sense of the cost of books. And I remember some of the books I was requiring were going for, say, $12, and I thought that was outrageous. And today it's cheap. But that's a product of the times, and I'll give you an example of salaries, too. We didn't talk about this. But when I started here, and we as faculty got a raise, my salary, which I thought was fantastic, it was $9,500 a year. And that was almost $10,000. And to me, $10,000 was middle class. My father never made more than $7,000 something or other. And immediately I started out making more money than he, and I thought that was fantastic. I had another job offer, but they told me, this was in New Jersey at Rutgers University, one of their satellite campuses, that they were paying $8,500, and it's more expensive to live there. And they said, well, your wife's going to have to work. So even though I had family back east, we decided to venture across the Mississippi and come to California. Ken, I'll turn it over to you.
Okay. I want to tell you about registration. I think right now you're doing it online, and maybe I have to. My wife keeps telling me to bring this up. Okay, I'll try to do that. I need to have some sort of a thermometer or something that goes up in the background and shows me. Oh, that's my wife. Okay. Okay. The early days of registration was done in person before the quarter began. Just a day before the quarter began, or 2 days before, and students would show up at the gymnasium and walk inside. Of course, after you wait in line a little while, you walk inside the gymnasium, and all around the periphery were little tables kind of flimsy tables loaded with cards in boxes, and faculty. Each table was a different department. So there's anthropology, here's biology, and here's music, and here's chemistry, all around the gym. So you decide what class you want. You find the table, you walk over, and you say what class you want. They look in the bin and they see, oh yeah, we have 3 cards left, and you get them. And you have a package of cards. When you leave, you have to pay whatever your cards turn out to cost. And then when you go to class, you turn the cards in, and it was a very simple system. We do have high winds in San Bernardino on occasion, and I do remember one poor gal. She was just sitting outside the gymnasium. She'd finished paying. She had no cards. The high wind had caught them, and I think her cards were already in Mentone. They just, like that. But you have to have the cards to get into the classroom. I don't know how that worked out for her. The cost of textbooks was incredibly, much cheaper than now. I'd say 1/10 the cost of what the books are now. Well, here.
Yeah, all right. Yeah, a couple of things come to mind. I mentioned the number of courses that faculty taught. One of my colleagues told a story, this senior colleague at the time, how he was talking to a legislator. And when the legislator found out that we taught 12 hours, he was shocked that we were teaching 12 hours a day. And when he found out it was 12 hours a week, that was a whole different story. But he had no understanding of what that meant. 12 hours doesn't still, even for a week, doesn't sound like very much. But when all the effort in terms of preparation and grading and continued research and such, that's a pretty heavy load when when faculty members are expected to be productive, to do research, to publish, as we are, and depending on your field, if you're in the arts, you have to produce. So that was very heavy, and it's much better that we're teaching a little bit less now. Although there is, I think, pressure by the central administration to get us to teach more. And I think that does not bode well for the quality of education in the CSU system. Another thing to keep in mind is Ken mentioned the registration in the old gym, but before the registration was there, I think we were here for the last time. It was in what was then the old library. So the first 3 buildings on the campus, as I said, were the administration building, Sierra Hall, and Chaparral Hall. The library was on half of Sierra Hall. The side closest to the parking lot. That was all library. And the other half was classrooms and maybe a few administrative buildings. Where in Chaparral Hall, if you're familiar with, there's an open area, but that's partly closed in, facing the administration building. Well, that was divided in 2 parts. On the left was the bookstore. On the right was the cafeteria, such as it was. Everything's very compressed. So, but as a result of all that, because it was so small, certainly among the faculty and staff, if you didn't know everybody, you knew everybody by sight pretty much, and you knew a lot of students. And as it was mentioned, I was involved with intramural basketball and softball and the like. So I got to meet a lot of students who were not in my classes, and that was a wonderful part of it. There may still be intramurals, but it's been subordinated in many ways to the intercollegiate athletics, which came much later. There was resistance to having intercollegiate athletics on campus because the first president, John Fow, had come from the University of Chicago, where they did not have intercollegiate sports. He wanted to emphasize participation, intramurals, and he thought that there's always the problem of the dog wagging the tail, or the tail wagging the dog, as the case may be. And now we're at Division II. We started out Division III. Seems to be okay. I'm very happy that although I've had university athletes in my classes, some have done very well and some not, but I've never had a coach come to me and ask me to do this or that to favor the student, because I would be resistant to that. I think that's wrong. So here, I'll turn it over to Ken again. Don't forget, close to the mouth. Ooh, boy, it makes louder. I usually project pretty well, so I have no problem most of the time.
I used to project, but now I'm just like a nail in the floor. I stick up more than if that's a projection. I wanted to mention that the early campus mascot was not a coyote. Anybody know what it was? A couple, what was it? St. Bernard. Anybody remember Russell DeReamer? You remember Russell DeReamer? That was the guy we were trying to think of. We couldn't think of the name of this professor, or an early physics professor, and their dog, he and his wife had a dog, St. Bernard, that was the mascot. So what was the name of the school newspaper? You don't remember? The Paw Print. Okay, good. What is the name today? It just hurt me when they changed the name to some innocuous Chronicle. What is Chronicle? Why not have a little something and call it a Paw Print? You know. But anyway, it's Chronic. The Coyote Chronicle. Okay, well maybe that's okay. I wanted to mention that there were some complaints in 1969. If you remember, that was kind of an active movement. There was a lot of hippie anti-war rebellion, and so from Berkeley it trickled down here, and we needed free speech. The students were up in arms. We need a free speech area. So the president, John Fowle, signed the check, and they put in a big semicircular, like an amphitheater, very small amphitheater. And this was designed for a free speech area that the students could come and air their concerns. And, you know, I went there one day after the inauguration. There was one famous student on campus that really never came here to study. He just used campus as a place to display himself, and he had a cross erected at the back while somebody was trying to do the presentation, and he was, and I think it said grades. He had grades on a sign above. You know, he was being crucified on grades at Cal State. By the way, it was Cal State College, not Cal State University. So it was CSUSB, and so one of the physics professors had that as his license plate, CSUSB, long after it changed to CSUSB. You were going to mention SDS.
Yeah. In, was it 1971 when the students at Kent State were killed? I think it was something around that time. And this was, as Ken said, it was a very, it was a tumultuous time. 1968 was the year of just a difficult presidential election. Nixon ran against Humphrey. I'm sorry? Yeah. But right. In Chicago, right. In fact, when I was here Memorial Day, that was right after that weekend is when Bobby Kennedy was killed in the Ambassador Hotel in Los Angeles, where I stayed once when I was working for the College Board. But it was a very testy time. This campus was fairly low key in terms of activities. We had some protests, but after the Kent State, and we should also mention, it wasn't just Kent State where students were killed. It was also Jackson State in Mississippi where some students were killed at an all-black university. And so we decided we were going to have some days of I think we call it convocation. We may have used a different word. I can't really recall. But we put together a faculty-student committee. I was on the committee, and we arranged for some speakers. I remember there was someone who was on the conservative side from UCR who came and spoke, and one of our professors, a former music professor named Richard Saylor, who died some years ago. But I remember them challenging one another. And I gave a public talk. This was in front of the administration building. And I gave a talk on violence. I was teaching a course, and my seminar today is on revolution, comparative revolutions. So I talked about violence in the sense of it's such an active part of life, both in this country and other parts. And some people heard me and thought I was advocating violence, which I was not. And I was a young assistant professor. I did not have tenure. The word got back to my wife, and she was scared that I was going to get fired. And I said, that's not what I was saying, and nothing happened, obviously. But it was a tense time. And I remember having a student who I learned later was, I only know the second hand, but that he was there to keep an eye out on some professors, to listen in. I was teaching a course on revolution. What does that mean? I would always tell my students in that class, field work is not required in the class. We were talking about theory and causes, the understanding. But this student who I got along with apparently reported back. I have no idea if that's accurate, but it was that kind of time. Today, we're aware of the way in which we can be spied upon, our phones bugged, our emails compromised. So this was an early level of that activity. Yes.
Reported back to who?
Reported back, I think, to some government agency, maybe the FBI, but I have no specific knowledge on that. When we got here, there were, I think, just fewer than 2,000 students, and well, I said fewer than, less than.
No, I think we had about 300 students at that.
No. Good. No.
700? Boy, we don't even know. It's whatever we say it is.
Okay. What happened is, here, let me put it in a little perspective, whosever number is closer to being accurate. When I mentioned, I became what's called the Relations with Schools officers, the person who goes out and promotes the university. And up to that point, the CSU campuses were not allowed to advertise. We weren't allowed to seek students. And some of the schools are doing it anyway. And we were losing enrollment. We were dropping from the low number we were, whatever it happened to be. UCR was also losing enrollment. There was talk of closing one of the campuses, and it would have been this one, I'm pretty sure, and combining them. This was not a prospect any of us here looked forward to. So I was probably just under 30 at the time. So I was asked to take on this position. I got along well with students, and I was given a state car to travel, because I traveled all over the 2 counties. And the idea was to see if I can promote the university in a one-to-one fashion. I spoke to counselors as well as lots of students. And I think I made a contribution. I don't take any credit for turning this thing around by myself. I couldn't possibly have done that. But I think from that point on, we reversed the downward trend, and it slowly began to go up with periods of spurts that were larger numbers. And it's really hard to believe now that we're somewhere around 19,000 students. But again, it's part of it's the life cycle of a university. And some universities can go on and on forever. Some have short lives, like I'm hoping some of these for-profit universities have. I don't have kind words for them. But an institution like this serves a great need in both the 2 counties and beyond. And I'm sure I speak for Ken if I say this. I think it's a wonderful place. And we've had some fantastic students. And it's always been a thrill to be here. It's been a challenge. Hasn't always been easy. There's always resistance. But it's amazing how some of the students can mature and grow. Do you want to?
Yeah, things have changed in another respect. Every meeting room had a big table with chairs around it. They still have big tables with chairs around them for the meeting, but they don't have the big ashtrays, the CSUSB ashtrays. Everyone had to have ashtrays because there was lots of smoking at most of the meeting rooms, and some of that's changed now. There's, I think we should mention too that the drama production that I recall in the early stages was in Chaparral Hall. There wasn't a separate building, and it wasn't a room it wouldn't reach from here to that wall square. It was much smaller than that.
Intimate.
Huh?
Intimate.
Yeah, intimate, okay. And so the productions had to be in the round. When you bought your ticket and you walked in, and there were just chairs, they were probably not folding chairs, they were solid chairs, but there weren't any arms on them or anything. You just sit all the way around the wall. There might have been 2 deep all the way around. And so the actors would come in, and the show was in the round, right in front of you, and then they would run out the other door. And then they'd come in again, and the drama production, I don't even know how they thought to put it on with such a small amount of accommodation. They really had nothing to work with. let's see. You wanted to say something about intramural football? Did you mention that already?
Talk about that. No, I
We
haven't.
didn't have football.
We had football. I'll explain. Clark, did you want to?
Well, I wanted to go back to something else.
Go ahead. Then I'll come back to this.
To what do you attribute the fact that the college was actually shrinking from its earlier enrollment?
I think the Inland Empire was not considered a desirable place. The smog was much worse than it is today. The coastal universities, both UC and CSU, were more desirable places. So we and UCR were second, third, fourth choices. And then we live in the two counties where, as I remember from being a relations with schools officer, San Bernardino was a county that sent the fewest number of high school graduates on to college, including two-year colleges. So the idea is to try to change the mentality of families to be able to encourage their sons and daughters, and especially the daughters, because in a lot of the families, the young girls were not encouraged to go to college. They grow up, all right, you finish high school, you get married, you have kids. So the idea was to try to change that thinking. I mean, and we're still working on it, but I think we've been succeeding. So I think that's some of the reason for the decline.
Others I've talked to, and I wasn't there at the time, but have attributed this partly to the Dartmouth of the West.
True. Yeah, and that refers to the goal of the first university president, John Fow, was to try to create Harvard of the West, Dartmouth of the West, a small liberal arts university or college that would become at least intellectually elite. And that was the goal. And it really was not a practical goal, not that early in the university's career. And to the extent that was the characterization of the university or the college, then I think that was intimidating to a lot of the potential college-going public. So that's a part of it too. It's good to mention that. Ken was asking about the intramural sports. I like to play basketball. I played up until my mid-40s. I hurt my back pretty badly, and I had to give that up, although I'm still able to work out, for which I'm grateful. But on Friday afternoons, the faculty, this is very early on, the faculty we get together, among the faculty is men. Most of the faculty were men, by the way. And let me go off on a quick tangent. Most of the faculty were men. Most of us were young. At the beginning, I remember the average age of the student body was slightly older than the average age of the faculty, because we had a lot of retired military. Norton Air Force Base used to be in San Bernardino. We had a lot of people who would be in the police and housewives whose kids were growing up. So we had an older population. We still have a population that's from an older segment of society, but it's mixed much more with more traditional college-age students. So at any rate, so most of many of the male faculty, if they so wish, would run down to the playing fields on Friday afternoon, and we'd have sort of a pickup, choose sides with a touch football game. Nice and easy, nothing too heavy. And it was a lot of fun. And then someone introduced flag football. So we would wear these little bands around our waists with flags stuck with Velcro or some such, or maybe just tuck them in. And instead of tagging, you had to pull the flag off, which is the equivalent of tackling that person. And then students started getting into our game, and some of the faculty begged off and stopped participating. I stopped participating after one game. We had a faculty member who was in the sociology department, and as an undergraduate, he had been on the varsity football team at Arizona State. He wasn't very tall, maybe he was 5'10"-ish, but he was a bear of a man. And there was a student, big guy, 6'5", solidly built, and I remember ball was thrown, one side, run the other, and these two guys came toward each other, and the former football player, the teacher, put up his arm for a cross check on this guy's chest. You know how in an earthquake there's an epicenter, and yet it could be felt elsewhere? I heard the bang. I felt my body vibrated even though I wasn't touched, and I realized I could get hurt doing this in a way that I might not recover. So I gave up on that. but I continued to play pickup games. I go down once or twice a week afternoons and play, and then in intramurals I play that too, and that was always a lot of fun. The interim provost at the university, Juan Delgado, was an undergraduate English major here and eventually a professor of English. And I remember playing basketball with him when he was a student here. And he was a little guy, but quick. He was a very fine basketball player. I was a role player. Another thing to keep in mind, let's see, I had it in my mind. Let's see. Young people, what happens is you forget things. You have it in your head, and then it goes away, and sometimes it comes back, and sometimes it doesn't come back. Go ahead.
Let me see if I can remember something here. I wanted to tell. There are only there was about half and half, I guess, students here. You're concerned probably about having big debts when you graduate, and a lot of students have unbelievable. I mean, just almost incomprehensible debts, and of course with higher interest rates than it should be. But when we were here at the beginning, there was no tuition. There were some fees, a few fees that would amount to perhaps $200 a year, $300 a year, and then your books were 1/10 the price of what they are today. It was quite a bit less strenuous financially in those early days. So you didn't graduate with this monumental debt. There might be students today that don't know what a tumbleweed is. There would have been no student like that in 1968. As you drive up Kendall toward the campus, on a windy day, you would have to be dodging the rolling tumbleweeds coming across Kendall because they just came blowing it from our campus across. We had sagebrush, not everywhere on campus, but here and there, 8 feet high. I remember thinking where the art building is today, that was very dense sagebrush. I thought you could camp out in there for maybe 2 or 3 days and before the campus police would discover you, because it was really that thick and that remote. I want to mention something that you students won't have any idea about because you haven't graduated yet. But graduation is something you're going to look forward to. In the early days, I can't remember my first graduation. I know I didn't miss any. I missed one in 42 years. But I don't remember exactly where it was. I remember 2 or 3 years later, the graduation was outdoors on a grandstand. But it was a small grandstand. There weren't a lot of people. I think there might have been 100 graduates, something like that. It didn't take very long. It wasn't broken down into 5 different sections, you know. So graduation was pretty quick and easy. The parking was not a problem. You're in and out. You get it done, and you're home for brunch, you know. Okay, your turn again.
Yeah, I do remember the first graduation I attended here in 1967. It was in what's now the old gym. It was indoors. It was in the evening. And everybody who was graduating and all their family were there. And it was a pretty sedate affair, the usual kinds of music that gets played. What I remember particularly is that when I got my PhD, I bought my own cap and gown. So my graduate work was at New York University, and the color is violet. So my own cap and gown had a black velvet cap on the European style, and the gown was velvet with some blue in the hood and this and that. And the president had his very fancy gown from the University of Chicago, and everybody else was in the black mortarboard black gown, very boring. Now today, when you go to attend graduation, a lot of faculty have their own caps and gowns, and it's a much more colorful affair. But at that first graduation, I was a first-year assistant professor, and here I seem to be taking some of the thunder away from the university president. Fortunately, he didn't go after me for that.
Ken bought his the first year, his cap and gown, with the Indiana University
Okay.
stuff on.
Did you attend that graduation in '67?
No, 68.
No. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. 69. Spring '69 is what I meant. Not '67. Yeah. Okay. Well, maybe I was ignoring you then. I don't know. There was a pivotal event in San Bernardino in the mountains in, what, 1980. I'm talking about the Panorama Fire. That was in 1980. It was the fall of 1980. This was a huge fire. I was teaching that day. It began up in the mountains, and the winds were blowing, and it moved down. And I remember seeing it move down, and I was coming back from lunch to my office was then in the administration building. And within an hour or so, as it had moved closer, the call was out to evacuate the campus, which we did. But before it was evacuated, I ate lunch mostly with a group of people from the art department and one guy from the geography department. So several of them lived in North Park, just nearby, and the fire was hitting that area, and they wanted to go in. One had to collect his dog and his papers, and the other guy wanted, he had a couple of big dogs. So we went in. It was a very, I'll compare it to a Pompeii-like experience. The wind was blowing, so it was beautiful. The sky was crystal clear. It was blue, no clouds. And then we drove along North Park here, and when we got to roughly where Cajon High School is, just a little way down the road, the other end of the campus here, suddenly no sun. It was dark. We were in the middle of this thing. And as we drove to the first guy's house, he went in to get his dogs, and firemen were on the roof next door of his next door neighbor, watering it down. Same thing with the other guy. By the time I got back to campus, the campus had been closed. I got my car. I went home. I lived in Rialto, North Rialto at the time, and had to water down my roof. Very scary times. We had a number of faculty and staff lose their homes. People who lived at the north end of Del Rosa and Waterman up in that area, a lot of them lost their homes. I mean, completely wiped out, as you've seen in other fires that people around the state and other states. Yeah. And driving through those areas, North Park, for example, it was like going through a war situation where entire blocks are wiped out. You see a chimney here and a part of a structure there, but totally devastated. Now the neighborhood's much better looking now because everybody built their own homes rather than the tract homes that were there before, but at a great cost.
Do you remember the Dr. John Hatton story?
No, John Hatton was a psychologist and
Dr. Hatton was a psychologist and here, and he was on stage in Hollywood on Jeopardy while his house burned down. And his wife picked up the kids. They got some stuff out of their house, which ended up going down. They drove in, and I knew them well,
Yeah.
and it kind of takes my breath away to tell the story. But at the end of Jeopardy, who is it? Alex Trebek invited the family up on the stage, and they're crying, and John doesn't know what's going on.
Yeah.
Like, aren't you happy? I just won $16,000.
not enough to build a new house.
Well, they did.
I mean, not for $16,000.
No. But that was quite a
I do remember that now that you mention it. I had forgotten about that. I remember an episode having to do with a faculty member. This was in Ken's College, Natural Sciences. We had what was then a woman who was a part-time person. She was an Indian from India. Her name was Saroja Mankow. And I think when I came, she was, I think, either an adjunct, a part-time person. I don't think she was tenure track at the time. And for reasons that I don't know, she was being let go. Now, we were, as a faculty and really as an administration, we were a very white group of people, and mostly male as well. And here was Sarojan, a woman from India, and obviously dark skin. And as far as I'm aware, is a very fine teacher, but something went on I don't know about. In any case, there was protest, and she got to keep her job and eventually got a tenure position and stayed working here until she retired. Her husband was a scientist at UC Riverside as well.
And they're now retired in Cabo, most of the time.
Okay. I haven't seen her in a long time, but I remember that. I also remember, I'm thinking maybe it was around 1971, 72, we began to have retreats for students and select numbers of faculty up in the mountains somewhere. And So I remember the first one I went to. We slept there for a couple of nights, and there were activities, and that was a lot of fun. Just being everything was very informal, and getting to know a number of students, and I like that. What I like also about this university is that I can get to know my students. If we ever come upon an age when all teaching is done through a machine, or I'm here and you're wherever you want to be around the world, for me, I guess I'm more like a stage actor as opposed to a film actor. I need an audience to feed off, and that means a great deal to me. And I have taught to an empty room, not because students haven't shown up. I usually get somebody shows up. But when I've been away, I've gone to meetings, and I've done a lot of work away from campus. So I've been away, and I didn't like the idea of canceling classes. So I would tape the lectures earlier in the week. So even though it's not the same as my being there, I could still keep the students caught up. But it was difficult to be animated when there's nobody there. And if I would crack a joke, nobody to laugh. And I'm not the kind of joke teller who laughs at his own jokes. But again, it was a means to an end, and it was better than not being there at all. And I'd always have little surprises for the students. I brought in I had a little Chucky doll once, and so I had them come in the side. So just stuff to goof around with.
The tests were different. And when you have small classes, when you have a class size of 20, you can grade a lot of long written answers and worked out problems. But when you have classes that approach 200, you suddenly have to have multiple choice, true, false, machine scored exams. So the campus, as it's grown, obviously the class size has blossomed and maybe gone beyond what it should be. So now a lot more of the tests are machine graded, and you have multiple choice, true, false answers, so you don't get to express yourself. In some cases, that's good, because I noticed that the quality of student writing was deteriorating as time went by. I don't think that the average quality of student writing was as good as it was when we started out in 1969. But perhaps my memory is as bad about that as it is with how many students were on campus in the early days.
I'm going to disagree with you.
Okay, but
Finish what you're going to say.
okay. And I wanted to say that the mechanisms in the lecture we had the Blackboard lecture, and that's probably what we'll always have till the end of time. But in addition to the Blackboard lecture, there might have been an overhead occasionally, but there was certainly no internet connection. You weren't showing anything that you pulled off the internet. There wasn't any PowerPoint. Anything that we handed out, like tests or handouts, came from a mimeograph machine that had to be cranked like this somewhere. And it was a lot of work for professors to make those, because when you made a mistake when you're cutting a mimeograph template, that was not easy to repair. What would you want to fix up on that other one?
Well, I'll give you my perspective. I remember when I was in middle school, this was in the mid-1950s, and the then older generation, they were lamenting about my generation, and we were not as motivated, and we were not as able at this and at that. And I hated that idea. And then when I started to teach, and there always were people who were going to say, the kids today are not the same. And there are differences because of the access that students have to so much multimedia. It does take something away. But I had fine student writers, for example, when I started teaching. I still have some. I have fine student writers. I have some who write very poorly. It's always been a mix. And even schools like the Ivy League schools like Harvard, they too have some remedial classes for certain areas of activity. A couple of other things to note. Classes used to start at 8:30 in the morning, not at 8 o'clock. We eventually moved that around. Courses were 5 units instead of 4, with the extra unit, the 5th unit, meant to be for additional work. And when not enough faculty were giving additional work, we reduced it to 4 units. I believe this ended before I got there, but I believe there used to be there were books that everybody in the campus was supposed to read a book and have discussions. And I think there may have been some common exams or year-end exam or something of that sort. So are we getting the hook for the time?
Well, I think we got the
Some questions, right? Good idea. Okay, I'd like to hear from some of the students, because the older people, we can talk, a lot, and especially those of us who are teachers. So among the students, things that you're curious about that we might not have covered, a perspective we can provide for you. Please don't be shy. Go ahead.
I was supposed to ask about the Powell Library. I heard it used to be one building before they added a wing to it.
Yes, yes. This wing was added, I don't remember what year, but 10, 15 years ago? No more than that, I don't think. Yeah. Yeah. So,
University Hall was built in '91.
okay.
And so we had classrooms, and I'm in the philosophy department, and I came in '81. And the School of Humanities, before we had colleges, they were schools. You remember that?
Sure.
School of Humanities, now it's the College of Arts and Letters. And so we moved over there in '91, and I think the wing went up after that, but I'm not sure.
Okay.
I think it might have been.
So again, the library started out in Sierra Hall on half that building, and then when this was built, do you remember when this opened?
Well, it says out there.
1970.
Early 70s, right? Yeah. Okay. So then there was the centerpiece, and then this wedge came up, and I guess somewhere down the line, not in the too distant future, there'll be another wedge, maybe. That's the theory.
I have to say one last thing, and that is that the number of women has greatly increased. The fraction of the population, there were very few girls in classes in my early days. At least I didn't see. Maybe 10% of the students that I had were female. And of course, that it didn't take too long. I would say maybe 15 years. It moved rapidly toward 50-50. And as far as the racial mixture, you remember, has there been a lot of change? Has it increased?
American has increased considerably.
He was here. What year did you come?
I came in '68.
68. So what year did you say the Chicano population has increased?
Yes, tremendously. So the percentage-wise, yes.
Juan, you came when you were a student, though, right?
Are you going to say
right.
goodbye to us?
That's when I first met you, sometime early.
Are we going to say goodbye?
Are we going to say goodbye?
It's time.
Anybody else with a question? Like any young women here? Something burning inside that you want to ask about? Parking. Parking was not an issue. There was no specialty parking. The only person who had a reserved parking space was the university president. Otherwise, it was first come, first serve.
Parking was still an issue, though.
Huh?
You only had the one parking,
Well,
but it wasn't as bad as it is now.
mostly it was, am I going to park in this row or that row? Now, Ken and I have different memories about the cost. Ken says it was free when we started. My memory is that it was not, and the reason I remember that is that coming from New York, I was surprised that I had to pay for parking because the only way I could get to the campus was to drive. So to me, it was a tax in order to come to teach.
I don't think he ever
Well, folks in Indiana can be sneaky that way. They say that about us from New York, but we're really very honest.
I wanted to mention, I haven't been out to Cal State in a year or two, but I was shocked to see all those apartments when you drive
Oh, across
in.
the way there, yeah.
That was supposed to be the first week of campus. The president, Dr. Fowle, gave a private tour to the faculty watch, and there were about 10 of us. And we walked around, and he pointed to that area and said, now this is where the faculty housing, your home, will be built here in the next few years. And nothing had happened until
No, and then there was some private money that was available to build some kind of a faculty club across the street from the campus over there. And that fell through.
That was the rustic inn.
Or the Wooden Nickel. One of those places. All right, the women are choosing to be quiet. That's your right.
You guys will be around for a little bit?
Sure.
If you have questions,
Sure.
on behalf of the library,